But it was an exciting night. There's so many people I got to meet, share.
When the ocean crowns you and takes everything back. At 7 years old, a boy was taken from Hawaii. The ocean ripped away before he could understand it was part of his soul. Decades later, that same boy would rule the sea on screen, standing at the center of a $114 billion global phenomenon, worshipped as a modern god. The world saw strength, power, victory. But behind the armor of Jason Momoa, the truth was far less heroic. A body slowly breaking from brutal stunts, a marriage collapsing under the weight of fame, and a lifelong wound left by losing home too early. So before we applaud the legend, we must ask the question Hollywood avoids. How did becoming a king cost him everything that mattered most? By the time the world truly noticed him, the image was already fixed. Broad shoulders, warrior eyes, laughter that sounded like thunder. Jason Momoa was introduced to the public not as an actor, but as a force of nature. Hollywood didn't sell him as a man with a story. It sold him as a symbol. Power without hesitation, strength without cracks, a fantasy built to dominate the screen, and audiences embraced it instantly. In an industry obsessed with polish and predictability, Momoa felt raw and ancient, like something dragged up from the ocean floor. He didn't resemble the traditional leading men who came before him. He looked untamed, unapologetic, real. That difference became his greatest asset and his quietest trap, because when the world decides what you represent, it rarely asks who you are. As Aquaman, he carried an entire franchise on his back, redefining a character long treated as a joke and transforming it into a global icon. Studio executives saw profit. Fans saw a hero. Media saw headlines. What almost no one saw was the pressure of being reduced to a single dimension, physical dominance, while everything else was pushed aside. Momoa became famous for his body before he was respected for his endurance, for his presence before his patience, for his roar before his silence. And silence was something he knew well. Fame arrived not as relief, but as acceleration. The pace of life doubled, then tripled. Projects stacked, expectations hardened. The myth demanded consistency. Always strong, always fearless, always available. Pain was inconvenient. Doubt was unacceptable. Vulnerability had no market value. What made this especially cruel was the irony. Jason Momoa had already spent most of his life learning how to survive without being seen. Hollywood didn't teach him endurance. It exploited it. Every interview reinforced the same narrative. Every photo shoot sharpened the same image. The world applauded the king of the sea, unaware that the man beneath the crown was navigating exhaustion, physical damage, and emotional distance that success only amplified. This is the contradiction at the heart of his story. The more powerful he appeared on screen, the less room he had to be human off it. The more famous his name became, the quieter his personal struggles grew. The higher he rose, the further he drifted from the idea that fame would somehow make him whole. Because long before Aquaman, long before Hollywood, Jason Momoa had already learned a hard truth. Losing home leaves a scar no victory can erase. And to understand why fame could never save him, we must return to the first loss of his life. The moment identity was interrupted and belonging became a question instead of a certainty. He was born in Hawaii, a place where identity is not taught, but inherited. The ocean is not scenery. It is ancestry, rhythm, memory. For Jason Momoa, that connection was written into his blood before he could speak. And then, almost immediately, it was taken away. As a child, he was moved from the islands to the American mainland, far from the water that shaped his people. The decision was practical, adult, necessary. But for a child, it was disorienting. Hawaii didn't just disappear from view. It became a ghost. Something remembered, but unreachable. Something felt, but no longer lived. Growing up in the Midwest meant learning how to exist without mirrors. No ocean to reflect him back to himself. No cultural gravity to explain who he was or where he came from. He stood out everywhere, taller, broader, different in ways he couldn't articulate yet. Teachers saw a quiet intensity. Peers saw someone who didn't quite fit, and inside, he felt the same fracture widen year after year. Belonging became conditional. Home became abstract. While other children grew up surrounded by familiarity, Momoa grew up learning adaptation. He learned how to read rooms, how to observe before speaking, how to carry strength quietly because showing it invited misunderstanding. This wasn't resilience taught in motivational books. It was survival learned through repetition. The absence of Hawaii did something subtle but permanent. It turned identity into a question rather than an answer. He wasn't fully here, but no longer there. Not lost enough to collapse, not rooted enough to feel safe. That tension settled into him and stayed. Physically, he changed faster than others. Height arrived early. Strength followed. His body began announcing him before he understood himself. Attention came with expectation, and expectation came with pressure. People projected roles onto him long before he chose any. Protector, fighter, presence. The world started defining him by what he looked like, not what he carried. Yet beneath that exterior, he was still the boy who missed the ocean. What he didn't realize then was that this early loss would become preparation. The loneliness, the displacement, the feeling of always being slightly out of place. These were not detours from his future. They were rehearsals for it. Hollywood would later amplify these same feelings on a global scale. But before the spotlight, before fame, before mythology, there was only a young man trying to find direction, trying to understand where strength ended and identity began, trying to build something solid on a foundation that had been moved too early. And so, when adulthood arrived, he didn't chase dreams with certainty. He chased opportunity with endurance. Because when you lose home once, you learn not to wait for permission to survive. Adulthood didn't arrive with clarity. It arrived with bills, with uncertainty, with a quiet understanding that survival would come before dreams. Jason Momoa worked wherever opportunity appeared. Surf shops, short-term gigs, modeling contracts that offered visibility but no stability. None of it felt permanent. All of it felt necessary. Modeling opened doors, but it also narrowed the frame. He was seen, photographed, noticed, yet rarely heard. The industry learned his measurements before it learned his voice. When acting roles began to surface, they came with limits already drawn. He was cast for presence, not range, for physique, not complexity. It paid, but it didn't satisfy. A television role that looked like a breakthrough quickly revealed itself as another lesson. Exposure didn't equal control. Fame at a small scale still demanded compromise. He learned how quickly an image can harden into expectation, and how difficult it is to reshape once others decide who you are. Auditions blurred together, rejections stacked. Each almost carried the same message. Impressive, but not quite right. Too raw, too unconventional, too hard to categorize. Hollywood prefers certainty. Jason Momoa brought contradiction. What kept him moving was not confidence, it was stamina. He trained relentlessly, not for aesthetics, but for readiness. He studied the craft in quiet, away from the noise that judged him too early. He learned to wait without disappearing, to persist without demanding recognition. These were not glamorous years. They were formative. Then came the roles that didn't promise safety, but demanded commitment. Characters that required gravity more than charm, presence more than polish. Each one moved him a step closer to being trusted, not as a body, but as a lead. The real turning point wasn't a single audition or contract. It was a shift in perception. Directors began to see reliability where others had seen risk, endurance where others had seen limitation. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the current changed direction. By the time the ocean finally opened for him, it wasn't luck that carried him forward. It was years of surviving uncertainty without losing himself to it. Years of learning that momentum isn't built from breakthroughs alone, but from the ability to stay afloat when nothing breaks your way. And when the tide finally turned, it didn't lift him gently. It surged. When Aquaman finally surfaced, it didn't arrive as a safe bet. The character had long been a punchline. Expectations were modest. Skepticism was loud. But the moment the tide turned, it turned violently. Box office numbers rose past disbelief and settled beyond precedent. Over $114 billion worldwide, reframing a mocked hero into a global symbol and transforming Jason Momoa into a franchise cornerstone overnight. The celebration was immediate. Press tours spanned continents, interviews stacked like waves, red carpets blurred into airports, airports into sound stages. The image was intoxicating, a modern myth, tattooed, laughing, unbreakable. Hollywood had found a body that could carry spectacle, and spectacle demanded repetition. Repetition demanded sacrifice. Behind the fantasy, the work was brutal. Training blocks consumed months, diets hardened, sleep shortened. Stunts escalated in complexity and risk. Waterwork punished joints and lungs. Wire rigs taxed the spine. Fight choreography demanded impact again and again until muscle memory replaced caution. Pain became procedural. Injuries weren't anomalies. They were logistics. The paradox was cruel. The stronger he looked on screen, the more fragile the margins became off it. Sequels and connected projects accelerated the pace. With each new chapter, the expectation wasn't merely to perform. It was to exceed the last performance while appearing effortless. Recovery windows shrank. The body kept score. What the audience experienced as adrenaline, his nervous system experienced as debt. And yet, the machine kept moving. Success brought leverage, but leverage brought obligation. To studios, to schedules, to the myth. The brand of invincible left no room for limits. Saying no threatened momentum. Slowing down threatened relevance. The ocean that lifted him also pulled him farther from shore. At home, time thinned. Absence accumulated quietly. The work didn't cause distance all at once. It normalized it. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Intimacy requires rhythm, and rhythm is the first casualty of global success. Love was still there, but it had to compete with a tide that never receded. Then there were the scars that fame doesn't market. Long before Aquaman, he had already learned how quickly violence can etch permanence. An attack that left a signature across his face, a reminder that survival sometimes announces itself in lines you carry forever. During the Aquaman era, the injuries were different, but no less real. Chronic pain, where that lingers, the quiet recalibration of what your body will no longer give you freely. None of this made headlines the way box office milestones did. Triumph drowned out consequence. The myth demanded continuity. But inside the victory loop, premiere, shoot, promote, repeat, something fundamental shifted. Success and tragedy stopped alternating. They overlapped. The applause didn't wait for healing. The schedule didn't pause for reflection. And the more the world celebrated the king of the sea, the more he learned how lonely the crown could be. This is the unseen cost of superstardom. Not one catastrophic fall, but 1,000 small extractions. Time, health, presence, choice, each taken in increments small enough to ignore, until the total becomes undeniable. And when the personal reckoning finally surfaced publicly, it shocked those who had mistaken the image for the man. What felt sudden to the audience had been building quietly for years. Fame didn't end anything by itself. It accelerated what exhaustion had already begun. By the height of the Aquaman era, the ledger was clear. The ocean had given him everything the industry measures as success, and it had begun collecting payment in currencies no chart could track. For years, family was the place where the myth could rest. Away from sets and schedules, Jason Momoa wasn't a king or a brand. He was a husband and a father, learning a different kind of strength. The work demanded intensity, home demanded presence. Holding both at once would prove harder than any stunt. Love did not fail suddenly. It thinned, gradually, invisibly, under the weight of momentum. Fame does not argue. It occupies. It borrows weekends, then holidays, then ordinary nights that quietly keep relationships alive. Travel replaced routine. Promotion replaced pauses. Even when he was home, the next departure loomed, a clock ticking inside every conversation. Fatherhood recalibrated him. It slowed his instincts and sharpened his priorities. Protecting his children meant building walls against a spotlight that never dimmed. Privacy became labor. Normalcy became strategy. He learned that the greatest acts of care often happen off-camera, where no applause follows. But intimacy requires rhythm, and rhythm is fragile when life accelerates. The Aquaman era didn't invent distance. It normalized it. Absence became explainable. Fatigue became expected. Silence learned to coexist with love, and that coexistence changed the shape of the house. When separation became public, the shock belonged to the audience, not to the family. Headlines compressed years into dates and statements. What the world read as an ending was, for him, the final acknowledgement of a strain carried too long. There was grief in the exposure, not because love vanished, but because private pain had to be explained to strangers. He did not perform anger. He chose restraint. Protecting his children required discipline the myth never taught him. Strength this time meant refusing spectacle. It meant keeping the loudest parts of loss off the record. The aftermath brought a different loneliness. Fame offers company without companionship. Schedules fill days. Reflection fills nights. In those quieter hours, the old questions resurfaced. The ones planted in childhood, the ones fame promised to answer. What is home when the shore keeps moving? What is success if it costs the room where you are most yourself? Yet this chapter is not a verdict. It is a reckoning. Personal life did not break under success. It revealed the price of living at its speed. And within that revelation, something steadied. Boundaries formed, priorities clarified. The myth softened into a man learning where to place his weight, because endurance is not the same as health, and survival alone is not the same as peace. What came next would not be louder victories or faster schedules, but a quieter realignment, a decision to choose meaning over momentum, to turn toward roots rather than run from them. The crown was still there, but it no longer set the direction. Today, Jason Momoa moves differently, not slower, deliberate. The urgency that once governed every decision has softened into intention. Fame still follows him, but it no longer leads. After years of being pulled outward by schedules and spectacle, he has begun to turn inward, toward roots, responsibility, and a definition of success that doesn't demand constant proof. The work remains, but the filters have changed. Projects are weighed against time, health, and meaning. Visibility is used as leverage, not for louder applause, but for quieter causes. He speaks about Hawaii not as a brand, but as a promise to protect land and water, to honor culture, to reduce harm where profit once ruled. The ocean that once took him away has become a compass pointing back. This shift doesn't erase the cost already paid. The body remembers. Chronic pain doesn't negotiate with reflection. Loss doesn't dissolve because lessons were learned. But meaning alters the weight of memory. Where fame once required silence, he now allows honesty. Where momentum once demanded endurance, he now insists on balance. What's changed most is the measure of strength. It's no longer defined by how much he can carry or how long he can push. It's defined by what he refuses to trade away again. Presence with his children, stewardship over spectacle, home over constant motion. The myth didn't prepare him for this chapter, but the man did. And that is the message behind the legend. You can conquer the sea, you can wear the crown, you can survive the storm, but peace arrives only when you stop proving yourself to the world and start keeping your promises to what you lost along the way. The shore isn't a place you reach by winning. It's a place you return to by choosing.